Shadows of doubt. Fiona Wade believed in signs. It was how she'd survived 2 heartbreaks before meeting Ethan Mercer, by reading the subtle warnings that came before the crash. A forgotten date here, a mysterious text there. Each relationship had taught her to spot the red flags earlier, but after 3 years of marriage to Ethan, she'd almost forgotten to look for them. Almost. "Don't forget to pack my blue shirt," Ethan called from the bathroom, voice barely audible over the shower. "The one with the pearl buttons, I know," Fiona finished, smiling despite herself as she folded the shirt in question. Tomorrow they'd leave for their 3rd anniversary trip to a lakeside cabin in Vermont. 3 days of autumn colors, warm fires, and no distractions. Fiona reached for Ethan's leather weekender bag, the one he'd had since college. As she unzipped the inner compartment, her fingers brushed against something hard tucked into the lining. Curiosity piqued. She reached deeper and pulled out a small wooden box with intricate carvings. Her heart quickened. They didn't keep secrets, at least that's what she'd believed. The box opened with a soft click. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, lay a copper bracelet adorned with tiny amber stones. A small tag dangled from the clasp with the initials VH engraved in flowing script. Fiona's stomach tightened. She knew those initials. Vanessa Hartley, Ethan's college girlfriend. The woman he'd dated for 5 years before Fiona. The one who'd broken his heart. "I thought I'd lost that bag forever," Ethan said, appearing in the doorway with a towel wrapped around his waist, hair still dripping. His smile faded when he saw what was in her hands. "Fiona, what is this?" She held up the bracelet, amber stones catching the light. "And please don't say it's not what I think." Ethan sat heavily on the edge of the bed, drops of water darkening the duvet. "It's not—" "I mean, yes, it was Vanessa's, but it's complicated." "Complicated?" Fiona echoed, the word hollow in her mouth. "When were you going to tell me you're still carrying around your ex-girlfriend's jewelry? Before or after our anniversary?" "That's not fair," Ethan said, his voice soft but firm. "I wasn't hiding it from you. I honestly forgot it was there." "In the bag you use every time we travel?" Fiona's laugh was sharp. "That's convenient." Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Fee, please." "I ran into her about a month ago. She gave it to me because—" He trailed off, looking suddenly lost. "Look, can we talk about this after the trip?" "It's really not what you're thinking." Fiona carefully placed the bracelet back in its box and set it on the nightstand. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Never ignore your instincts. They're trying to protect you. If it's innocent, why wait to tell me?" she asked, crossing her arms. "Because it's complicated and I didn't want it to overshadow our anniversary." Ethan ran his hand through his damp hair. "I promise. After the trip, I'll explain everything." That night, Fiona lay awake beside her sleeping husband, listening to his even breathing. The wooden box sat on the nightstand like a splinter in their otherwise perfect marriage. She'd always prided herself on being reasonable, not the jealous type. But now, doubt crept in like fog, silent and all-consuming. Tomorrow they would drive to Vermont as planned. She would smile and pretend everything was fine. But the woman who packed their bags for the cabin would be a different Fiona than the one who had started the day, one with eyes wide open, watching for signs. Confrontations and half-truths. The drive to Vermont should have been picturesque. Maple trees ablaze with autumn colors, winding roads cutting through mountainsides, the promise of solitude ahead. Instead, silence filled the car like a third passenger. Ethan kept one hand on the wheel, the other reaching occasionally toward Fiona before retreating to the radio dial. "Do you want to stop for coffee?" he asked as they passed a roadside diner. "I'm fine," Fiona replied, not looking up from her book, one she hadn't turned a page in for the last hour. The wooden box sat in her purse. She'd packed it on impulse that morning, unable to leave it behind like some ticking bomb in their empty apartment. Now it seemed to pulse with each mile marker they passed. When they finally reached the cabin, a rustic A-frame overlooking Lake Champlain, Ethan carried their bags inside while Fiona stood on the deck, watching the water shimmer under the afternoon sun. In another reality, one without amber stones and mysterious initials. She would have been taking photos, planning their hike for tomorrow, opening the bottle of wine they'd brought. "It's beautiful," Ethan said, coming to stand beside her. His shoulder barely brushed hers, a tentative connection. "Why did you keep it?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Ethan sighed, his breath visible in the cooling air. "Can we at least get settled first?" "We've been settled for 3 years, Ethan." Fiona turned to face him. "I thought we knew everything about each other." Something flickered across his face. Not guilt, she realized, but pain. He leaned against the railing, eyes fixed on the distant shoreline. "Vanessa has been sick," he finally said. "She contacted me about 2 months ago. We met for coffee just once, and she gave you a bracelet?" Fiona's voice held more hurt than she intended. "That's quite a parting gift for coffee." "She didn't give it to me as a gift," Ethan said, frustration edging his words. "She returned it. I gave it to her our senior year." The revelation hit Fiona like a physical blow. The bracelet wasn't Vanessa's, it was Ethan's gift to her. Somehow that felt worse. "So you've been carrying around a token of your past relationship? That's supposed to make me feel better?" "It's not a token." Ethan pushed away from the railing. "It's complicated. Vanessa is going through something difficult, and she wanted to tie up loose ends." "What does that even mean?" Fiona pulled the box from her purse and opened it. The copper glinted accusingly in the sunlight. "What kind of loose ends require keeping secrets from your wife?" "I wasn't keeping—" Ethan stopped himself, running both hands through his hair. "You know what? I need some air. I'm going to get firewood." He walked down the steps toward the woodpile, leaving Fiona alone with her thoughts and the bracelet that suddenly felt heavier than its delicate form suggested. Inside, she unpacked methodically, hanging clothes with precise movements that belied her inner turmoil. On the bedside table, she found a framed photo of them from their wedding day, Ethan looking at her with unguarded adoration. The man in that photo wouldn't lie to her. Would he? Her phone buzzed with a notification. A social media memory. 1 year ago today, they'd been preparing for their 2nd anniversary, Ethan surprising her with breakfast in bed. The caption she'd written, "Found the one who makes all the broken pieces fit." Now those pieces felt scattered again, sharp-edged and dangerous. Without fully forming the intention, Fiona found herself scrolling through her contacts until she reached Vanessa Hartley, a name she'd never deleted after adding her years ago during a moment of jealous curiosity. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Outside, she could hear Ethan stacking wood. He would be at least 10 more minutes. "Hello?" The voice that answered was soft, slightly hesitant. "Vanessa? This is Fiona, Ethan's wife." Silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. "I think," Fiona continued, heart pounding, "we need to talk about a copper bracelet with amber stones." The unexpected call. "He didn't tell you, did he?" Vanessa's voice came through the phone with surprising clarity. No hostility, just weary resignation. Fiona closed the bedroom door, even though Ethan was still outside. "Tell me what, exactly?" A soft laugh, almost sad. "That's Ethan. Always trying to protect everyone but himself." "I don't need protection," Fiona said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I need the truth." "The truth," Vanessa echoed. "The truth is I have multiple sclerosis. I was diagnosed 6 months ago." The words hung in the air like suspended particles, slowly sinking into Fiona's consciousness. Not at all what she had expected. I'm sorry," Fiona managed, genuine despite her confusion. "But what does that have to do with a bracelet hidden in my husband's bag?" "It's not hidden, it's returned," Vanessa corrected gently. "That bracelet was a gift from Ethan our senior year of college. He had it made by an artist in Prague during his semester abroad. The amber stones were supposed to be the same color as my eyes. His words, not mine." Fiona looked down at the bracelet in her lap, the amber catching the light. She'd never noticed how warm the stones were, like honey trapped in sunlight. "When we broke up," Vanessa continued, "I kept it. Not out of sentimentality, but spite. He'd ended things so suddenly and I was hurt. The bracelet was expensive. I knew he'd want it back. But he never asked for it," Fiona guessed. "No," Vanessa confirmed. "That's not Ethan's way. He lets go completely." Outside, Fiona heard the cabin door open and close. Ethan's footsteps moved toward the kitchen. "So why return it now?" she asked, lowering her voice. A pause, then, "MS makes you confront your own mortality in strange ways. I started cataloging regrets, trying to right old wrongs. Keeping that bracelet was petty. When I was diagnosed, I decided to return everything I'd held on to out of anger." "You could have mailed it," Fiona noted, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "I did try." Vanessa sounded tired. "But your address had changed. When I finally got his number from a mutual friend, I asked to meet. I wanted to apologize in person for how I'd behaved after our breakup." Fiona's throat tightened. "And Ethan went." "He did." "But Fiona," Vanessa's voice grew earnest, "you should have seen his face when I mentioned you. He talked about nothing else for 20 minutes. How you restore old furniture. How you make terrible pancakes but perfect omelets. How you're the only person who laughs at his astronomy jokes." Despite herself, Fiona smiled. Those terrible jokes were a running gag between them. "The bracelet was just closure," Vanessa continued. "For both of us. He didn't tell you because—" She stopped abruptly, coughing. "Because why?" Fiona pressed. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice was softer. "Because I asked him not to. I didn't want to be the sick ex-girlfriend disrupting your lives. He agreed to keep my diagnosis private, not the bracelet. That was his choice. Maybe he couldn't figure out how to explain one without the other." The bedroom door opened, and Ethan stood there, wood dust on his sweater, eyes moving from Fiona to the phone to the bracelet in her hand. "Is that—" he started. "Your wife called me," Vanessa said through the speaker, loud enough for him to hear. "I think it's time you told her everything, Ethan." Compassion unveiled, Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, his expression shifting from shock to resignation. Fiona ended the call with a quiet "thank you" to Vanessa, then set the phone down beside the bracelet. "You should have told me," she said, not accusingly, but with certainty. Ethan crossed to the window, looking out at the lake now painted with the gold of approaching sunset. "I know. Why didn't you?" Fiona asked, joining him. "Did you think I wouldn't understand you wanting to help someone you once cared about?" He turned to face her, eyes red-rimmed from the cold or something more. "It wasn't about not trusting you. It was about respecting Vanessa's privacy. And maybe—" He hesitated. "Maybe I was afraid you'd see it as more than it was." "Which was what?" Fiona pressed, needing to hear it from him. "A chance to make something right." Ethan sat on the bed, shoulders slumped. When Vanessa called, she didn't just want to return the bracelet. She asked if I knew any neurologists. Her insurance was giving her trouble, and she remembered my cousin works in healthcare. The pieces began to fit together in Fiona's mind, not as a betrayal, but as an act of kindness kept private. "I made some calls," Ethan continued. "Got her an appointment with Dr. Whitaker at Mount Sinai. Then we met for coffee, and she gave me back the bracelet." He reached for it, turning it carefully in his hands. "I didn't know what to do with it afterward. It felt wrong to throw it away. It cost a fortune back then, and the craftsman who made it was so proud of it. But keeping it felt strange, too." "So you put it in your travel bag," Fiona finished for him. "I was going to donate it, actually. There's an artisan jewelry collective downtown that sells vintage pieces for charity. I just—" He trailed off. "Hadn't gotten around to it," Fiona said, understanding dawning. It was so typically Ethan, always meaning to finish tasks but getting distracted by new ones. "I should have told you about seeing her," Ethan admitted, "but when she asked me to keep her diagnosis private, it complicated things. Then the more time passed, the more awkward it felt to bring up." Fiona took the bracelet from his hands, examining it more closely. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the copper wire wrapped in intricate patterns around each amber stone. "You have a good heart, Ethan," she said softly. "It's why I fell in love with you. You help people without expecting recognition. You keep promises, even difficult ones." "But I broke our promise of honesty," he countered, pain evident in his voice. "Yes," Fiona acknowledged, "and that hurt. But I understand why now." Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows across the lake. From somewhere in the distance came the haunting call of a loon. "When we got married," Fiona said, turning the bracelet over in her hands. My mother told me that love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about how you handle them when they happen. Ethan reached for her hand, tentatively. This time she didn't pull away. I'm sorry, he said. Not for helping Vanessa, but for keeping it from you. For letting you think, even for a moment, that there was something to hide. Fiona leaned against him, her head finding its familiar place on his shoulder. I'm sorry, too, for jumping to conclusions, for not trusting that there was a reasonable explanation. So what do we do with this now? Ethan asked, nodding toward the bracelet. Fiona looked at it thoughtfully. I have an idea. Mending hearts. The next morning broke clear and cold, the kind of autumn day that feels almost too perfect to be real. Fiona woke early, watching golden light filter through the cabin windows, painting patterns across Ethan's sleeping form. His arm was draped protectively over her waist, the same way he'd held her since their first night together. Present, steady, anchoring. Last night, after their conversation, they'd built a fire and opened the wine they'd brought. They'd talked for hours, not just about Vanessa and the bracelet, but about the fears that had lain dormant beneath the surface of their marriage. Fiona's fear of abandonment, Ethan's worry that his natural reticence would be misinterpreted as secretiveness. What are you thinking about? Ethan murmured, eyes still closed. How strange it is, Fiona replied, tracing the line of his jaw with her finger. That something meant to be a romantic gift for one person ended up teaching two completely different people about love years later. Ethan opened his eyes, smiling sleepily. Poetic thoughts for 6 a.m. I'm serious, Fiona said, propping herself up on one elbow. That bracelet traveled from Prague to Boston to New York, from your hands to Vanessa's to mine. And at every stage, it meant something different. After breakfast, they drove into the nearby town of Burlington. The artisan market Fiona had found online was housed in an old brick building near the waterfront, its windows displaying handmade jewelry, pottery, and textile arts. Inside, a gray-haired woman with paint-stained hands greeted them from behind the counter. Her name tag read Eleanor. We're looking for someone who works with copper, Fiona explained, removing the wooden box from her purse. We have a piece we'd like transformed. Eleanor examined the bracelet with an artist's appreciative eye. Beautiful craftsmanship. Czech work by the look of it. Prague, Ethan confirmed. About 8 years ago. And you want it changed? Eleanor asked, raising an eyebrow. Fiona nodded. We were thinking maybe the stones could be removed and reset into 2 separate pieces. Something simple. While Eleanor consulted with a younger artisan named Raphael, Fiona and Ethan wandered through the market, fingers intertwined. They stopped before a display of copper wind chimes that sang in the breeze from an open window. Are you sure about this? Ethan asked quietly. The bracelet is valuable. We could still donate it? Fiona squeezed his hand. I'm sure. Besides, it's just metal and stone. What matters is what we choose it to mean. 2 hours later, they left the market with Raphael's promise that their commission would be ready by the following afternoon, just in time for them to pick it up before heading home. They spent the day hiking along the lake shore, taking photos of the blazing maple trees, stopping to watch a family of otters play in the shallows. That evening, they built another fire and sat wrapped in a single blanket on the deck, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. I called Vanessa back, Fiona said, resting her head against Ethan's chest. While you were in the shower this morning, she felt him stiffen slightly. Oh, I invited her to dinner next month. I thought maybe we could help her find resources for her treatment. My client Joanne runs a support group for MS patients. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, then pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You're remarkable, you know that? The next afternoon, they returned to the artisan market. Raphael presented them with 2 small boxes. In one was a simple copper pendant on a leather cord, a single amber stone set at its center. In the other, a copper tie clip with a matching stone. The remaining stones we've set aside for a community project, Eleanor explained. Local teenagers learning metalwork will use them in their creations. Each piece will be auctioned to support arts education. As they drove home that evening, Fiona wore her pendant over her sweater, the amber catching the last rays of sunlight. Ethan's tie clip was tucked carefully in his pocket, waiting for Monday's return to work. You know what I realized? Fiona said as they crossed the state line back into New York. "When I found that bracelet, I was looking for a sign that something was wrong. And instead," Ethan prompted. "Instead, I found a sign that I married exactly the right man," she replied, touching the pendant at her throat. "Someone who keeps his promises even when it's difficult. Someone who helps others without needing credit. Someone who, when faced with a choice between compassion and convenience, chooses compassion every time." Ethan reached across the console, taking her hand in his. "And I realized I married someone brave enough to seek the truth, even when it's easier to assume the worst. Someone who turns suspicion into understanding. Someone who can transform an old wound into something beautiful." The highway stretched before them, leading home, not to the apartment they'd left 2 days ago, but to something stronger. Something tempered by doubt and reforged in trust. Behind them, somewhere back in Burlington, a young artist was already working with the remaining amber stones, creating something new from what had once been a token of a different love. And in a hospital in Manhattan, a woman fighting her own battles would soon receive a card signed by 2 people she barely knew, offering help on the journey ahead. Some gifts, Fiona thought, are meant to be kept. Others,